Oh, hell. That's better. Okay, so it's been a while since I've done one of these live streams. A lot has happened in the world of sport. There's a lot of debate about what professional sports should do. A lot of sports are now in financial difficulty. We know the NRL is in a lot of financial difficulty, and the length that they are off could determine whether the NRL survives or not. And it's been reported that NRL players could be taking up to 87%. 87% wage cuts, salary cuts. Now they've already been paid out for 5 months, but it's looking likely that the NRL players could face up to 87% of their remaining salary this season being, taken away. There's got to be players' meetings, there's got to be league meetings to work out the fine details of that, because a lot of players have been paid, like bonuses and etc. But their remaining salary, 87%, needs to be cut. Super League, it's a figure has been reported about 75% wage reduction is required for the Super League to have enough financial reserves or make it through. Yeah, we could debate about the TV right money and where the money's gone. But this is now a time to see what the clubs have really been doing with the cash. Now, some clubs like the Roosters are in good financial shape. Some, like the Panthers, are not so much. The Cronulla Sharks, I think, are the club in the strangest position, because they're the only club in the NRL that own their own stadium. Shark Park is owned by the team. All the other teams rent the space that they play in, and that is another cost that is incurred. So, yes, I did see that Boris Johnson has coronavirus. I'm a frontline public sector worker in this country, in the UK, so we get regular updates when we go to work on a daily basis. Talking about the finances of our sport, the FA here in England is coming under a lot of pressure for basically voiding the non-league season below the National League. So the National League is what the old conference was. That's the league below the Football League. The leagues below that, so the Conference North and Conference South, now known as National North and South, and the leagues below, they've been voided, and clubs could, take the FA to court over that. And a lot of the non-league clubs survive hand to mouth. A lot of the Football League clubs survive hand to mouth. Could this be the issue that breaks the football's money bubble with insane salaries? Because a lot of the Football League clubs, not just in England, but across Europe, are reliant on gate receipts. Only a very small proportion of clubs actually are stupidly wealthy, ironically. But a lot more clubs are relying on, merchandise sales, such as what I'm wearing here, sports gear, and ticket sales. So the financial side of sport is really, coming to the fore at this point. But allegedly, what owners own or don't own and things like that is another thing as well. Clubs are standalone entities in this case. Now, if the owner does have the money, they can pump money in. If the owners don't have the money, they can't. So the NRL is an interesting one. The AFL is another interesting one. And both leagues, for me, come under criticism for starting their leagues when they did, and not pushing back the start date. Knowing that the rest of the world wasn't going to lockdown, Australia, I think, was a bit slow on the uptake there. So the NRL is in a position where they need to complete as much of the season as possible. If they can go back to playing, if they are to play every game behind closed doors, they'll only lose 100 million Australian dollars. If they can't go back to playing, the NRL, as Todd Greenberg's basically said, we're going to lose $500 million Australian dollars if we cannot complete the season or get any season played. State of origin, they can get that played at some point. That will help somewhat alleviate, but clubs' books are now going to be fully audited and opened. And yeah, we have to ask the question where the $1.7 billion has gone. That's a lot of money. That's a hell of a lot of money. And they do get grants as well. The NRL does get grants. And the last time they got given some financial assistance as a league, they were told if clubs go to the wall, they go to the wall. The last time I think the NRL was in this position was the early 2000s, late 90s, with the Western Suburb Magpies. I think is a prime example of a team that went to the wall. Broncos, South Sydney Roosters, Warriors, Storm, Parramatta, Bulldogs. Man, I think there are Penrith is the club that's been most reported as basically broke. New Zealand, the Warriors, they're basically owned by New Zealand Rugby League, so they're technically owned by a state subsidised entity, but they always struggle with money as well. We know Cronulla are in a weird position, as I say, as they own their stadium, and they're the only club, at this current time in the NRL that actually owns their own, hardware, so to speak. They own their stadiums, so they could leverage that land that they own, and they could sell it to survive. Not that they would want to do that and then go into a rental agreement, which would be weird because they'll make money to then pay money, but it's a way to survive. But a lot of the clubs are a joint venture. There's a couple of joint ventures in there. It's an interesting one. I think the clubs that have historically had financial issues are really in trouble, really, really in trouble. So and Penrith is the one that's been used as the open example where they've come out publicly and said, look, we're going to go to the wall here if we cannot get some kind of assistance from the Australian government or the state government. Bearing in mind, Australia's gone through a lot over the last 6 months, so to ask state and national federal governments for money, considering the bushfires and the flooding and all that, I think would be taking the biscuit somewhat. Do I think any sports leagues go bust? Yes, I do. The CFL in Canada is one which is heavily reliant on gate receipts. Yes, they've got a national broadcast deal in Canada, but they don't really have an international broadcast deal. It's the Canadian version of the NFL. It's only got 9 teams. They are heavily reliant on merchandise sales, and they have a very limited season as well. So the CFL, very short season. There's only 9 teams in it. Heavily reliant on gate receipts. If they can't get games played, they make no money. Other major sports leagues in the US and Canada have bigger TV deals, bigger fan bases, more available cash reserves. I think CFL could be a league that could go to the wall if they can't play games. Other leagues that could go bust, a lot of clubs could go bust. I think it's more rather than leagues themselves going bust. Although British ice hockey is not awash with cash. That is a hand-to-mouth existence, even in the elite league, the EIHL. Some of the European ice hockey could have to be restructured. I would have thought, and I wouldn't say the leagues would go bust necessarily, but the clubs that constitute the leagues could, have to reform. They could go bust. But with what the government is saying in the UK, at least, I think that does provide some kind of protection, where they basically said that we're willing to pay 80% of your salary up to this much money. This is where the players have to take pay cuts in order for clubs to survive. So Birmingham City, their players have been advised to take a 50% pay reduction. That's still good money they're on. Yes, they've got outgoing bills and mortgages and their lifestyle choice will have to change. But I think this could be the moment where football's money bubble has burst. And it's not by clubs overspending in the transfer market, but it is sort of linked to that. They have massively overspent on wages for 20 years. It just took a health crisis rather than a financial crisis of football's own making to break football, I think. This is the final straw that breaks football's back. When the only other, when people are asking, do I think leagues go bust and how long do I think this goes on for? I've got a friend who lives in China. He's a school teacher. He's gone over there to work. They've been under lockdown for 3 months. They're starting to get back to normality. They're still very wary of overseas travellers coming into China. They stopped having new cases. The only cases they're getting in China are from people returning, who maybe Chinese nationals or non-Chinese residents who are coming there back to work, and they're bringing the virus with them. So I would say 3 months lockdown is what is going to happen. 12 weeks. Here in the UK, we're a week in. Other countries about 2 weeks to a month in. So yeah, if you think of it like that, then it would mean restrictions on overseas travel. This is where international sporting events like the Olympics could not go ahead. What surprises me, though, and I will answer more questions as we go on, is how the IOC left the Olympic cancellation so late, so late. Where when the IIHF said, "Nah, we've been brave to delay it as long as we have," and I think the reason why the IIHF delayed the Ice Hockey World Championships was to sort out the contractual stuff. They officially made the announcement. I believe unofficially they already knew they were going to suspend. I think they were having those legal discussions with the host broadcasters and international broadcasters, the sponsors, the organisers in Switzerland. So they took their due diligence in the sense that they kept very, very quiet about it. But when they had cancelled the women's event in Canada and the World Juniors and the other age level international hockey tournaments around the world that were meant to happen this May, they did their due diligence. They left themselves, I would say, a bit of wiggle room, and then they decided to cancel their event. they are a big player when it comes to the IOC. As soon as the IIHF did that, the Canadians, who have obviously been sending a team, and the Australians, two big Olympic nations when it comes to the history, hosting games, medal tallies. And the Canadians said, "We're not going to send athletes to Japan," and the Australians followed on pretty much on the same line, saying, "We're not going to send athletes either." And then my country, Great Britain, the UK and Northern Ireland, basically, the British Olympic Association says under consideration unless we get given some definitive what the plans are, be it a postponement or rearrangement or a shrunken down Olympics, we're going to pull out as well. When nations were threatening or actively saying we're not going to send athletes, the IOC was left with no choice. When a key partner of the IOC had cancelled their showpiece event, the writing was on the wall. The fact that they were so vague in their announcements, and the IAAF, which is Lord Coe's organisation, the athletics body, were not really giving much guidance. Athletes started, publicly coming out and voicing their concerns with what was going on, and that put pressure on the IOC. And Thomas Bach and Shinzo Abe, the Japanese Prime Minister, were eventually left with no choice. And the Japanese, I think, came to the realization that while they got their country's outbreak under control and were showing good signs of Japan returning to normal, they were clearly watching what was happening around the world with great alarm, and it became a no-brainer. Leagues to go bust. There shouldn't be a reason for a league to go bust, but then you look at the leagues that have basically said we have money problems, and both NRL and Super League have basically said, yeah, we could, as league entities, lose clubs, and that will affect us on the bottom line, which means we could go bust. Smaller leagues that have just set up, like Major League Rugby in the US, they have got corporate funding behind them. I will admit that, but they are a new league. They're trying to establish themselves. They're trying to grow the sport in the US. They are at risk, and not all leagues are as washed with cash as you think. Just because something is profitable doesn't mean they have cash reserves. This is, I think, where people don't realise the issue that we have now is when you have ex-players of sports saying, our leagues have money, our sports have money at the top level. They need to help the lower levels of the sport or sister leagues or things like that survive. That's kind of very public pressure. And I think if you look at the AFL, NRL, what's happening in Australia, the NRL are actually winning the PR battle when it comes to getting help financially. They basically said, look, we do have financial problems. We are a hand-to-mouth league in a sense. And we can ask the question where the 1.7, we'll call it $2 billion because that will round up. Nearly $2 billion of money has gone somewhere. But the NRL players and teams have been quite careful. We are more of a hand-to-mouth existence. We rely on gate receipts and club memberships being sold and season tickets being sold and on the match day revenues and match week revenues, season ticket packages where you can get 5 or 6 games, home games. But they've been very, very open in the NRL. What they say, the AFL haven't painted themselves in glory the last few days, saying like we did a fundraiser, we did the charity match, all-star match for the wildlife relief for the bushfires. We demand a bailout. Where the NRL are saying that we're going to need some help. We're willing to take pay cuts. We are willing to open our books, be it clubs, players' accounts. We're willing to, seek the help, but also negotiate, and have talks, constructive talks to work out, look, we need money in 4 weeks' time. The NRL has enough cash, I believe, to get through the next 4 weeks to 12 weeks. So what could be a 3-month long deal, they could survive that point, but then players are going to have to go back into training and they're going to have to start playing games again. And when you have like 3 months off to suddenly go, right, you've got to play a competitive fixture after 3 months off, you're going to get injured. So player welfare is an issue there. The AFL, however, are not covering themselves in as much glory. They do have more money reserves. That is true. They have more clubs. So there is, more matches, more fixtures that get played, things like that. But they're not covering themselves in glory. They're losing the PR battle. On the side of a league to go bust, I think leagues are made up. They're they are reliant on their constituent members, so to speak, for revenues. Um, the Premier League is a weird situation. They've stated that they, alongside UEFA and the FA and all the various European leagues, have stated they want to get the European season by the 30th of June. They want to finish it, but they've given out these rough start dates when they want to get back playing again and finishing. And yes, we are in quarantine, sort of, but I'm a frontline worker, so I actually get a pass to go out to work. I haven't got my letter with me, but I've basically got a key worker letter saying if the police stop me, I produce my ID and I produce the paperwork. So look, I've got to go to work. I work in this industry in waste collection, so all that, and so forth. Now, the Premier League's in an awkward position, such as is Premiership Rugby as well, and the Super League, ironically. All the leagues are in a very, very strange position because they have TV rights, and BT Sport and Sky Sports predominantly have the TV rights for these leagues. They might demand reimbursement for the packages they bid on because they paid some money to make a lot of money. And viewers, who I think are absolute muppets for buying these subscriptions, because this, I think, is the problem with sport, is there's too much money in it and everyone wants a bit of it and no one wants to share it, and the average fan is getting priced out. But fans who've bought the TV packages and the online streaming packages are demanding refunds. The league has said it wants to finish by the 30th of June. Broadcasters are saying, well, we demand a rebate on the rest of the packages that we can't sell. So they're all wanting their money back. And this is where it gets really bizarre. The broadcasters have a lot of cash, lots of money. BT is propped up by the mobile phone network at EE and the BT mobile phone network. BT doesn't need to get its money back. It doesn't. Trust me, I should know. I'm an EE BT customer and I'm being shafted by them with their overpriced internet and phone bills daily. But they're demanding their cash back. And that's putting pressure on the Premier League to complete these fixtures. But it's also the Premier League's putting pressure on the clubs to tell players, you've got to reduce your wages. You've got to take pay cut, you know, to keep costs down and during this period where we can't play games. The players are going to have to think about, you know, will the PR of them asking for these big money contracts be tolerated by the fan base anymore? We've reached a turning point in football. Not the turning point we wanted to get to this point, but this was going to happen at some point where fans would start seeing their wages as obscene. They are. And this incident is showing how obscene their wages are. Now, some players and some clubs are doing great things in the community, assisting the communities in which they're based. Some players, donating money so people can, get through this period. Some players are helping the non-playing club staff by paying their wages or topping up their wages that they've lost while we're in this lockdown. Other players, not so much. Some players don't want to surrender their 300,000 a week, and this is the problem. I've mentioned the player salaries and the ticket price and the subscription price and a variety of other things for 3 years on this channel. 3 years I banged the drum saying they're overpaid, the ticket price is out of control, the transfer fees are wrong, the agent fees are wrong. It's coming home to roost now, and now the public are not so happy for these guys to make stupid money. Make some good money, but they've reached a point now where we're going, actually, we've gone on too long. Rugby union's in the same boat. The players are contemplating whether just to retire. And rugby union, as we know, has got issues with the finances at club level and has done for 25 years. Professionalism hasn't technically done what it was meant to do for rugby union. It's actually created more problems than it's solved, I believe, financially. So rugby union's in a similar boat to football or soccer if you're a North American. Rugby league's just a mess. I think, oh God, I've got messages going off left, right, and centre here on my phone. I think what we're seeing is the US. Now, I'm an NHL fan, as you can tell. I'm wearing my NHL kit. I'm wearing my Jets jersey. Now, I support a Canadian team. Now, the Canadians have put the country into lockdown. They're putting all these measures in. It's a federal lockdown. It's a thing saying, right, from Ottawa, from Nova Scotia to Newfoundland and Labrador to British Columbia, they are giving some leeway with each province in Canada that I'm aware of. But they're basically saying what we've got over in the UK is these are the rules. Restrict your movements outside. Only go to work if you're a key worker, like a frontline medic, refuse collection, transport, road haulage, grocery store attendant, that kind of thing. America, as it's just 50 states scrambling for themselves. There is no national plan in America. Now, the NHL have been doing their planning to get back to play, and various sources are saying various things. Various things are being reported. Okay, and what differs is the various plans on the table. We might not even have a Stanley Cup awarded this year. They might go sod it. They might go straight to playoffs and have a weird playoff format where it's literally straight knockout, like an FA Cup here in England, where it's winner takes all in a match, which is weird, but might be more entertaining because teams know they have to go and win. They are trying. They've worked out provision for arena dates. The issue is the American situation is look at New York State. Both the Rangers and the Islanders, if you were to have a 2014 playoff system, the state of New York is in an absolute shambles. Most of the US's cases are in New York State. It's just a mess. And the central government isn't really superseding state government. State governments are making up the rules as they go along, and local counties are having jurisdiction. So basically, there's too many layers of government in the US. Ironically, we're saying that. And there's no centralized direction, which is affecting how sport will be played. So the various sports leagues are obviously having meetings with each other because some of them share space. So the NBA and the NHL share arenas. Major League Soccer and the NFL, Major League Baseball, Major League Rugby will share training facilities and possibly share stadiums. So they've also got to, have meetings. And if there's no central direction from the government and contradictory, direction from the government saying it is one day and the next, and various states having their own version of lockdown, it's just a disaster. Yes, we've seen that they're competing for medical equipment. Some states are in a far better situation than others. Some states I don't think have any cases. New York State is a mess. California is a mess. And then you go to somewhere like Idaho or Wyoming, and there's like 5 people infected, and it's business as normal until they reach a point where they go, okay, now we've got an infection rate that's getting too high. So the densely populated areas, densely populated states are in a mess, and they're the states which have the most federal facilities, the most links to the federal government. Some of the least populated states, you wouldn't even think there's a national epidemic or pandemic, and this is the problem, and it will affect professional sport. It will. There can be. Oh God, camera. That's it. There can be no denying that this is a turning point, and the sporting calendar and sports events will definitely be changed going forward. The problem is, going back to the question of leagues going bust. The leagues may not go bust, but their structures may change. The number of teams in it may change. New teams may be formed to join. Old teams may be mothballed. So we are going to see a change on the sporting landscape. And we look at English football, especially in the non-league. You look at European rugby, for example, the NRL. There are clubs that have come out and said we're on the verge of not being in existence in days if we cannot find a financial solution. And some leagues, as we found out with the NRL, the money's disappeared. And this is where questions have to be asked, because we've seen Andrew Johns is just one ex-player who has his opinion. That means the league will make less money. ironically, that would mean the league would make less money because then you've just lost four fan bases who are willing to buy into a 12-team league. They will not be going to games. So to shrink the league down is the wrong idea. I think you have to look at why 1.7 billion Australian dollars, where it's all the money's gone. Because ironically, rugby league players in the NRL are not paid stupid money. I will say that they're not paid massive contracts. They're paid well. There is a salary cap for a reason. So the question now has to be asked where all that money's gone. So yeah, and then you've got to say which four unlucky teams have to be cut from the competition. And we were here before. We've been here before 20 odd years ago with the Super League War, which nearly destroyed rugby league for different reasons, but money was a thing. And there was a battle between Sydney and the rest of Australia. And joint venture teams were formed. And the teams that have gone for joint venture normally have struggling finances going forward. And I don't think that's going to be the solution. The problem that you have, though, is the question mark about where the money has gone. Some teams are really well managed. Some teams have very wealthy owners that can just pump money in and cover the losses that the players and the non-playing staff will incur by not getting paid. So some teams are in a better financial position than others. The question is, where is all the money gone that could be a financial buffer for all the teams when a situation like this, when there's a public health issue, or if the bushfires had happened now, for example, we couldn't start play because of bad weather or the forest fires. This raises the question about where that financial buffer has gone, and it's the same for the AFL. The AFL may have more money, but they're losing the PR battle when it comes to getting help financially. The NRL are doing quite well on the PR front. I think Andrew Johns has his opinion. He's totally entitled to that. Whether you agree with it is another thing. And which four teams do you go, right, you're getting cut from the competition? Because there's only two teams I think you could cut because they're not successful, and that's the Titans and the Warriors. They have not won the grand final. Cronulla have won the grand final only a few years ago. It would be really inappropriate, I think, to cut them from the competition. They're the only team that own their stadium. They have a financial bargaining chip, whereas other teams don't. So then you're right saying, well, is it St George? The Titans is the choice that everyone would say should not exist or be moved. But then you're just moving a failing team to another location. It doesn't matter where you move them. No, I just moved back home. I moved out of my flat just before the chaos hit due to various reasons, and I moved back to where I was living 6 months ago. So I'm back where I was. Just moved 9 miles down the road again, back into the house I was living in before I moved. It's complicated. The question about the Gold Coast Titans is they're the least successful team ever in the NRL. Since the NRL has been the NRL, even though they are the newest team, they've never made the grand final. They've never made it. They've only had 3 finals appearances in that time. The Warriors have made a grand final and been losers in the grand final. The Titans have never made the grand final. They have had financial problems not that long ago, which was linked to the Cherry Evans deal that wasn't. But no, the Titans have been beset by scandal off the field almost from day one, with players getting up to no good, peptide scandal, drug scandals, money issues, poor governance, much like Parramatta. But Parramatta have sorted themselves out now. But who are the other 3 teams? Canberra, you've got to have a team in the Australia's capital, and they're a very, very successful team. And I'm a fan of the Raiders, so I'll be pretty pissed if they went out of business. And they're favourites to win the comp this year. They got the grand final last year. They got the semi-finals a few years ago. They're a pretty solid team. Then you look at the Melbourne Storm. They actually, ironically, don't make as much money as you think. They're propped up by the NRL. And that's where the question of the salary cap breaches and why they weren't stripped of more titles and why players, how they could keep that team together. The NRL props up the Melbourne Storm. It's the NRL's insistence that Melbourne has a team. Nothing more. But then Andrew Johns, does that mean the Newcastle Knights Do you move them? This is where the questions are going to get asked. Which sport, which sport or sporting league do I think returns the quickest? Good question. Team sports wise, it's a difficult one because we're still learning about how this disease is transmitted. But it's a difficult one. Touch my face, but guess what? I've got clean hands, so that's it. What sport or what league do I think returns the quickest? I don't have I don't have a clue. We know that contingency planning is on the table for the NHL and NBA. They're looking at arena availability. They might go straight to playoffs and forgo the last 10 games of the season in the NHL, for example, which would benefit my team when it comes to playoffs. But then teams would go, well, we haven't completed a full season, etc., etc. But we've been in lockout shortened seasons before. Major League Baseball delayed the start of their season, and they have a chronic schedule. They're going to have to cut games. They're going to have to reduce the schedule. You've got the London series as well that they're contracted to, which is going to be a problem. If think about it this way, we in the UK may be out of quarantine by Easter. We might. Unlikely, but we might. More likely in the next 12 weeks, at some point in the next 3 months, we might. The US hasn't gone into a nationwide lockdown. It's all over the place, and therefore travel bans are going to be a thing. The Chinese have proved that travel bans and restricting movement from outside the country in does help stop it. The Major League Baseball, has a home and home series at the London City Stadium midsummer, roughly when the quarantine, in theory, the extension would end, if there is an extension, a 3-month period. Now, if it's what we're going by looking at other countries, overseas travel is still restricted. That's going to be a problem for Major League Baseball. They're contractually obliged to play these games in London. The other issue is if we have a delayed restart the Premier League season, that's West Ham's home ground. And that means really causing massive fixturing problems. This is the issue with Major League Baseball using a football stadium, athletic stadium, for a baseball match or matches. So Major League Baseball could have a lot of question marks. So they have delayed the start of their season, but the question marks are they're going to have some fixturing clashes, especially with that London series. That's going to be a bit of a nightmare, really. And Major League Baseball's got other issues apart from just the coronavirus. We know what's going on with the Astros, and a lot of questions have been asked about the integrity of the sport and a whole host of other things to do with how they dealt with the Astro situation and are dealing with the Astro situation. Very, very quiet on Major League Baseball on that side of things. They've been very, very quiet about a lot of things since the turn of the year. But we'll see what happens there. Will the Jets win the Stanley Cup? That's if we have a Stanley Cup. And if the playoffs were to start tomorrow, we are a playoff team and we are a wild card. I could not predict anything because all the teams are now in lockdown. You would have to get teams all back and training again. And all that momentum that teams have built up or lost over the season is gone. It's like a brand new pre-season. It's just like a short season, really. So, can the Jets win the cup? Will they win the cup? They will win the cup at some point. Can they this time round? That's if we have it. The NHL is thinking about a lot of contingency plans right now, so we'll have to wait and see with an asterisk against any NHL, NBA kind of play taking place in those indoor arenas. Which league is in bigger trouble? The NRL Super Rugby. I'm going Super Rugby because it's a multi-continental competition. It's played over 4 continents. Yeah, I think that's the league that's in the most trouble because each country at a different stage. Each country that the game is played is in different stages of lockdown. South America, I don't think in a full lockdown yet. South Africa's just got into one. Australia is obviously on a state and territorial level with what they're doing, although non-essential travel has been restricted. New Zealand, they've gone into lockdown, although they haven't got any major problems with the virus. And Japan, obviously, has contained the situation. However, the Olympics have just been cancelled. So I would say Super Rugby is possibly the most at risk of still having issues because it's played in 4 continents. The NRL financially, I think, is in more trouble, but I think is more likely to get games played behind closed doors as long as they can keep the teams isolated from Joe Public. They could possibly get things going. They're looking at things from a week by week basis, but again, the Southern Hemisphere is just entering its flu season. The Northern Hemisphere is coming out of its flu season. So I think the worst is yet to come in Australia and New Zealand, South Africa and Argentina. I think the worst is yet to come there. But I think Super Rugby is the most effective for how they're going to play games. Um, uh, I honestly couldn't tell you though, but I think both are in serious trouble. We know Super Rugby's also got money problems as well, worse than the NRL. I would have thought. Um, so we shall see what happens. I think the NRL is more likely to start playing before Super Rugby because it's played in predominantly Australia, a little bit in New Zealand, but it's basically in one geographical area, whereas Super Rugby played all over the Southern Hemisphere and the Pacific. If the playoffs come for the NHL, who do you think is going to win round one, Winnipeg or Vegas? Winnipeg's actually hit some form, but as I say, with this layoff and this length of time of layoff, all momentum's gone for both teams. Both teams were form teams going into the shutdown and started winning games. Both were technically in playoff positions as the league stopped. And if the NHL is going to say there's no more league play, we're going to go straight into playoffs with what we've got. It gets interesting. I would say I don't think there's any team that's more likely to win a round at this point because all momentum has gone. Be it lost momentum or gain momentum, it's like a fresh pre-season. And then you can call up players from the AHL affiliates as well. And we do know that an Ottawa Senators player, I think, has tested positive. I think one or two Ottawa Senators players tested positive. So I can't see the NHL coming back for a while yet. And looking at Vegas and the whole of the US and what's happening, I can't see the NHL coming back anytime soon, especially if Donald Trump is still president by Easter, because how he's dealing with the situation is an absolute mess and it's putting lives at risk. Will the Premiership be cancelled out of the non-league? I legally, contractually, that will be a nightmare. But the way the non-league's been treated by the FA and the protests they're putting up, I think that's going to really cause some ruptures. I I understand if they were, but then you've got to deal with like Liverpool being top of the league, and they lodge a protest saying, well, if you're going to just cancel the rest of the season, so you just award the title. Then the relegation threatened clubs like Bournemouth, West Ham, and Norwich, and etc. Well, they're going to go, well, we have games in theory left to play to save ourselves from relegation. Um, I think with how they basically said we are going to finish the season come what may by the end of June, if they were to U-turn on that, and UEFA have been very insistent because UEFA is really worried about the TV rights. They've already moved Euro 2020 so the European leagues can complete, and the TV media companies who make a lot of revenues, for UEFA. They're putting a lot of pressure on domestic FAs and UEFA to get the Champions League up and running, the Europa League up and running again, and the domestic leagues. There's a lot of pressure from big business, which I think is just totally wrong. They're insured against losses. Of course they are. They're just trying to make as much money as possible. And I do think people should cancel their subscriptions with Sky and BT as protest and demand a refund. And that will then but that's the problem, is putting more pressure on to complete the. I think there is insurance in place. There has to be, but it's all about the money, and this is the problem. And this is the problem with football, especially that the money bubble is the clubs, the leagues, the governing bodies, and the broadcasters are realizing that the money's got too much, and now it's the driving force rather than just the health of the game and the joy of the game. The money's taken over completely, and it's it has damaged the integrity of the sport and the image as well. Um, the coronavirus situation in New York is a joke. Well, that's the whole state. It's not just the city of New York. It's the whole state. So you've got a variety of professional teams. That's the NBA, Major League Baseball, the NHL, Major League Soccer, Major League Rugby. I think every major sports league in the US has teams in New York State, not just the city of New York. But no, the situation in New York as a state is an absolute disaster. And I think the difference is I don't think London's going to be as bad because we've got the nationwide lockdown. And I've got friends in London who are basically saying yes, there is definitely um, um, positivity there in that sense that the majority of people are sticking to that. Right, let's have a look. Why are people buying a lot of toilet paper? As a refuse collector, as a bin man, so to speak. So as the guy who collects the garbage or the trash or the rubbish, it bemuses me because here's the thing: it's made of paper. Ironically, toilet paper is made of plant fibers. So I don't know the stuff that makes books like this um, is what is also in toilet paper. Ironically, it's biodegradable. It will break down. The amount of people who've hoarded it, if any of those plastic packaging around it gets split and the air and the damp gets to it, it goes mouldy and then it just rots. It rots. As soon as it gets damp, it rots. So I don't. There's a reason why toilet paper gets flushed down the toilet. So I don't understand why people have bulk bought it. There is enough to go around in this country and around the world. It's the panic buying thing. People think, oh, it's an essential. All you need is a bidet in your bathroom. You can wash your ass. People are stupid. People are just stupid. But it's panic buying. The media hasn't helped. What the media could be doing is saying how people have recovered from the infection, the virus, the disease. It's going infection rate, deaths. They're not saying, oh, percentage have survived. People have got better. There's not enough of that positivity being reinforced. It's all negative, negative, negative. And so we're not hearing the positive stories of sports stars going out and meeting with arena staff or stadium staff or club shop staff and going, I'm going to help supplement your lost income. I'm on a multi-million-dollar or multi-million-pound contract. I'm going to help pay your wages for this club shop or this memorabilia stand or this club restaurant. We're not hearing of that. We're hearing of all death numbers. It's just incessant, and unfortunately, that's causing more. I went to the shops this morning. I've moved back in with my grandparents, and now in the UK, now they're saying in supermarkets and convenience stores and pharmacies, one person from a household at a time has to go in, unless that person is elderly or vulnerable, and they can go with a second person. So I went down. Today I managed to get pasta and some bread and some Scotch pancakes. And some waffles because I have a bit of a sweet tooth, and that's just me. I have a bit of a sweet tooth. But last week when I went down, there was just one packet of dried pasta. That was the last packet, and I got it. There was no toilet roll. There was no rice. There were no rice noodles. There were no lentils. Yes, lentils, the disgusting things that vegans eat. They were all gone. They even started to run out of alcohol, like beer and vodka. Apart from Corona Extra, because some idiots actually believe that Corona beer from Mexico gives you the virus. Oh, I'm not joking. I would love to be able to shop in the morning or every day of the week, but I can't because of my job. I'm only here right now because it's the weekend. And I've got Monday off because I've got to deal with the internet provider. They've got to come over and install my separate line so I can have my internet, which is actually quicker than the household internet. So I've got a day off, which I need, but it's also going to be a stressful day off. But we're not, and people are, panic buying. So they see an empty shop and they see it on Facebook, they see it on Twitter, they see it on the news. But not every shop is empty, and not every product's being bulk bought. Some communities have been really well behaved, others not so much. But what we see in the media is what people believe nationwide is the case, but actually it isn't. It isn't. But now they're restricting items, and those stores that have surplus are being asked to transport their stock to a store 5 miles down the road that doesn't, to balance it out. There is enough to go around. Um, and the way people are doing things is bizarre, and it's the media have a responsibility. The government and the company, even though the supermarkets are making massive profits right now and are actually employing a lot of staff, they're actually saying stop doing this because you're creating a stress on the supply chain that we just cannot cope with. This is not in our contingency planning for this kind of event to happen for as long as it's happened. But I think what hasn't helped is the media. And the same applies to sports. What I've been reading in a lot of sports articles is very negative about teams, about leagues, about players, about player agents, managers. There's a lot of negativity coming out, and a lot of it's to do with the wealthier sections of, let's say, football in this country, or rugby league, money issues, the way the IOC handled the Olympic postponement. There's not enough positive stories coming out of an individual athlete or team doing something positive in the community during this trying time. And the media again has a part to play. And the virtual Grand National is just, what a farce! What a farce! I cannot believe that that's been put on TV. That is bananas, because all betting shops are shut, and they're trying to get people to sign up to the online gambling. But it is a load of cock and balls. Try not to swear so much these days, but the betting companies, they will run virtual simulations. If they say it's 40 runners, they'll run the race 40 times virtually, so they can work out the odds. Italy are putting the 2006 World Cup on TV. We're going to have Euro 96 all matches shown in full online and on TV. So they're trying to fill the slots that would have been occupied by sport this summer. One positive is the 100 won't get played, because I think cricket has made a massive error of judgment by putting so much money into the 100 format. Now the format is at risk of not taking place, and cricket could lose a lot of money. No one's really mentioned that. It's not really been mentioned a lot. Just before Christmas, on my Facebook, on my Twitter, it was, on social media, adverts on YouTube, it was getting pushed. The ECB were really pushing the 100 format. But as soon as the coronavirus came about, the UCB ads when it came to the 100 format stopped. I think what the ECB have done, they've taken a big gamble, and that was on people buying into it, and they weren't. Now the coronavirus has basically killed the 100 and damaged the ECB financially, but no one's really talking about that. So that's what's really surprising. They're more interested in the Test series against the Windies, the T20 World Cup, and all these other things that are a thing. But just going through my emails there quickly, because people are still messaging me, because I've got some friends who actually also, like me, are key workers. So when we're at work, we have to be out and about, and some of my friends have got health issues, so just making sure they are still alive. My mate Jason's turned to the crazy cat guy, because he's got 2 cats. He's gone a little bit loopy. I do fear for his mental side of stuff, because he does suffer from depression as well as asthma. So, but unfortunately, because he's a high risk individual, I can't really go see him. I think what oh no, we haven't been given masks yet. When you're saying to the refuse collectors, bin men, garbage men, whatever country you live in, we haven't been given masks officially yet. We had a meeting, an outdoor meeting, ironically, so we're not in a confined space in groups of 5 to 10, about this issue, and it was raised, and we haven't actually been issued with them yet. We have got hand sanitizer. But they're coming up with some really weird spacing rules that we can't adhere to. The bin lorries aren't big enough. They're 6 foot apart. I could lie down in the cab, and you know I'm nearly the width of the cab. I'll be touching the driver's leg with my head if I lay across the cab. So the spacing, we are at a serious high risk. So are medical professionals. Um, we've also you've got medicals, paramedics, police. We can't do this spacing thing that the rest of the public can. We have to go to work. We are if you're a haulier, a truck driver, and you've got a trucker's mate, he's going to be in that cab with you as well. If you've got a guy to help you unload your load when you get to the other end. There is no way you can, have this separation. And we've had the meeting, and we are going to be having staff shortages next week. I mean, I've got a 4-day week next week rather than 5 because I've got a day off. But when I go back to work Tuesday, I can see staff shortages. What have we got? I'm a bin man. That's what I do for a living. Another sporting thing to talk about: Mike Ashley and Sports Direct, Tim Martin and Weatherspoons, and Richard Branson. He's a lot to do with sport with his Virgin companies. They're asking, they've been basically dickheads to their staff. I've got friends who work for all those companies, or have worked. That's been a bit of a PR nightmare. And Mike Ashley, he's obviously trying to sell Newcastle United, and I keep getting asked the question: Newcastle United takeover by one particular subscriber. It's getting annoying. Safe to say, Mike Ashley's not the most popular person right now when it comes to the British public. The sooner he's out of Newcastle United, better. But I can't see that happening. But they are in financial difficulty. They could collapse. Because the rest of Mike Ashley's business empire is on hold. On the he's trying on his website the day after he said we want to stay open. As soon as the government said no, you've got to shut, all their prices have skyrocketed to stupid amounts. So he's profiteering basically. He's profiteering. But the reason why he can get away with it is because he was already undercutting the rest of the sports market and had been doing that for 25 years. Because he gives the cheap, he does undercut. He bulk buys what Nike, Adidas, all that reject. Basically, they're less desirable lines. He bulk buys them, and he undercuts JJB or DW Sports, JE Sport, independent sports retailers. He undercuts them. So when he's out raising his prices, they're at the same level that a normal sports store would be selling them at. What the normal sports stores are doing while they're shut is reducing their prices online somewhat to encourage people to keep purchasing. Well, Mike Ashley's just raised the price because he's the biggest retailer in the sports market. He's a profiteer, he's a scumbag, and he's a bastard. That's my view on Mike Ashley. I'm not going to go into too much detail. If you watch my older videos, I do refer to him as the biggest women's genital part this country's ever produced. But I think Tim Martin from Weatherspoons, my former boss, and Richard Branson of Virgin, it's just a mess. I can't believe you declined the BMW apprenticeship. That's just, I would say, I did tell you to take it, but at the same time, we weren't to know this was going to happen. You could have accepted that BMW apprenticeship, and you could have still been put down on lockdown as a non. But I think Mike Ashley will eventually sell Newcastle United because he relies on popularity, and I can see a lot of people now boycotting his companies, and a lot of his companies struggling going forward. So I think he would eventually have to sell. He's driven by money, and we've already started to see before this lockdown, Newcastle fans were starting to stop turning up the games. When you have Newcastle fans staying away from St James's Park, regardless whether the team are in the league, they've had enough. But we shall see what happens. But I think he will sell. It's just a matter of when. On your recycling question, We have had meetings. Now, I work for Surrey Heath Council, which is where Michael Gove is the MP. Yeah, we've got a dickhead as well, that could be. Each council's different, but we're basically getting the same message because we're frontline workers. I think, yeah, staffing shortages. They're probably scaling back collections. They will probably collect if it's recycling. Yeah, that's one of the first things to get cut back. They've got to focus on the things that are a public health issue more, such as your food waste or your rubbish, and even garden waste to a certain extent because rats like to nest in things. So they're more likely to keep collecting the stuff that rots, basically. And garden waste, while it's not as bad for public health, it is still a nesting and breeding ground for rats because it's nice and warm in there and lots of nesting materials. And so that's probably why they're probably trying to mitigate possible staffing shortages. They're trying to mitigate and have contingency plans in place, and they've got to focus on the stuff that needs to be collected. Yeah, I mean, typhoid, cholera, yeah, vermin. So lots of rats, which then attract lots of foxes and badgers. Badgers carry tuberculosis. Badgers like eating rats, ironically, because they're omnivorous. Badgers actually eat a lot of stuff. Actually, um, basically, it in urban environments, you don't want lots of wildlife that are known to carry disease. Foxes can carry rabies, badgers can carry TB, and rats. There's a disease that rats can give you, and it's not very pleasant. It's actually quite grim. Actually, you die horribly with massive internal organ failure. So having a little chesty cough that may lead to pneumonia and pleurisy in like 2% of cases compared to, oh god, your internal organs have shut down and your internal organs have turned to putty. I think you want your rubbish collected or your food waste or your garden waste taken away because yeah, stuff that rots basically. Um, I think again, what the media need to do is say how many people are recovering from this illness. What they're doing is sensationalizing the deaths of 1,000 people, and they should say these are the numbers that are recovering or have recovered or are stable, who are showing no further symptoms, because the vast majority do get better, and this is the problem. I wouldn't say all capitalists are bad, but the examples I've given of and this is the same in the NHL with the owners of the Canucks and the Buffalo Sabres and the Boston Bruins not really paying their staff. Um, yeah, um, they're the examples that the whiny left, as I call them, like to use as boycott this, boycott that. In a socialist state, we're living in a socialist state right now. It's not very pleasant. Um, you know, sow the seed, you reap what you sow. Unfortunately, these particular companies have shown themselves to really be. We knew what Mike Ashley was a bit of a piece of work. We knew Tim Martin was a bit crazy. Now he's also shown himself to be quite, quite shitty. And we've seen Richard Branson completely lose touch with reality. Actually, out of the three, Richard Branson was actually an inspirational figure to a lot of people for a long, long time. As a guy who did battle against adversity, he didn't do that well at school. He had some good ideas, but he wasn't very good academically. And then he made a lot of money. The last 2 years have shown Richard Branson in a very bad light. He doesn't really seem in touch with the real world. I think they've shown themselves to be the stereotypical Bond villains, really. Look at Cuba if you want to see what social got them. They've got a good health system in Cuba, but it's just the Americans have put that trade embargo in place. If you didn't have the trade embargo in place, I think Cuba would be like Vietnam or China, just with the state controls on the media and not criticizing the state. Cuba could work. You just need the Americans to stop being assholes, but that doesn't look like happening anytime soon because Trump's in charge and Trump is an arse with a big hole for a mouth. He's orange and he's an idiot, mentally ill. idiot. But don't get me started on politics. I try and keep this as a sports channel. Is the flu worse than the virus? No, the virus is worse than the flu. I think you'll find. The flu, there are different strains of flu. We've known about it for a long, long time. What this virus is showing very big similarities with is the Spanish flu of 100 years ago. So it could be the same strain of flu virus that the Spanish flu was. It's one of the Hong Kong flu as well. It's showing big big similarities with the Hong Kong flu and the Spanish flu, and they took place 50 years apart. So that's where I'm seeing a lot of similarities between this current, what we currently have, and what we had in the late 60s and the early 20s, late 1910s, is exceptionally similar to what we have now. I thought Trump had some skin disease. We say, oh no, it's just fake tan. It's fake tan and hair dye. That's basically what Essex looks like. I've actually dated and have friends who've dated some very, very chavvy girls who put too much fake tan on, and it's not pretty when you actually see the makeup or the tan they put on to where they don't, and where they blotchy miss it, and you can see their true skin color versus that, and it makes you feel very, very ill, really ill. But we're sidetracking from sport. We have sidetracked from sport. Oh, now we're talking about wildlife. I can quickly talk about how foxes go from rural foxes to urban foxes. There's an overpopulation, and while people complain about fox hunting and how it should be stopped and all this, foxes do carry rabies. They also do attack livestock. Foxes are beautiful animals, but we're sharing land with them, and the more land we take from them, that's more of their habitat. They do actually suit an urban environment because they're sneaky predators. They're apex predators for their food chain, but they do suit an urban environment. And when you give them a free food source, they don't have to hunt for their food. But also, when you have an excess of rats, give them a plentiful food source. And rats reproduce every 6 weeks or less. Rats are just baby factories. So a fox can be well fed for quite some time, quite simply. Same with badgers. This is why you see lots of roadkill at the side of the roads, is because these rodents reproduce at a rapid rate. Rabbits, squirrels, rats, mice, voles, they reproduce at a rapid rate. And bigger mammals, such as foxes and badgers, weasels and stoats, even pine martens, who eat these things, they start coming. Pine martens not so much, but the others start coming closer and closer into the urban areas. And this is the problem when you have a lack of waste collection or things to disturb them, such as activity. The more active we as people are, ironically, that does sort of keep them away. When we are in this kind of lockdown thing, but we're still producing crap, they're going to come. They're going to come. It's interesting. It is interesting. Why this has become a political one now. Yeah, why are they even foxes in Australia? They're not a native species. This is where they were imported for fox hunting. Ironically, the landed gentry of Europe wanted to keep being landed gentry of Europe when they went over to Australia to get their plots of land, and so they brought the foxes with them and the rabbits so they could do what they did back in Europe and have their hobby. Right? Same with the bullfrogs. If we can get back to sport, because we have really sidetracked onto socio-economic and political stuff. Asked earlier, when do I see sport resuming? Don't know is the answer. We know that the NHL are looking at arena availability to possibly August. We know, same with the Volpo issues, that's a very good way of putting it, which is Latin for fox, is Vulpo. Lupo is Latin for wolf. Vulpo, with a V, is Latin for fox. Very interesting. But no, when we're talking about sport and when sport's going to get back going again. We still have sports stars around the world testing positive for this virus. So until that stops, we cannot go back to play. I've read articles where, yeah, as I say, the broadcasters are putting pressure on the various footballing governing associations and UEFA to get play resumed. Clubs are basically putting their hands up and saying that we're running out of money. And if we circle back to the NRL, and this is where I think rugby league in Australia and in Europe has a massive governance problem. Where has all this money gone for TV deals? Where has the money gone? We're talking between the two leagues around 3 billion Australian, £1.5 billion Australian dollars, $2 billion US dollars in TV revenue disappeared pretty much. If there is that much TV revenue, where has all the money gone? Why are only a handful of clubs, and we're talking a handful, we really are talking numbers of fingers on my hand, actually run prudently, well run, they've saved for a rainy day, they've got the structures in place, they've got the infrastructure in place, they've got that financial little backstop. Okay, that's by the by. There are some clubs that do operate on a smaller budget. We get that. But where has the NRL and Super League, safety net buffer gone? And this has been discussed for a couple of years now. As the falling attendance at the grand final, Challenge Cup, the falling attendance at league games in the Super League, the concerns with West Tigers, Parramatta, Cronulla, Penrith, Gold Coast, with various times over the last 10 years with these clubs having financial difficulties or issues with governance, finance, etc. So the warning signs have been there, but why have they not been acted on? And so rugby league fans around the world will be asking the question, where's the money gone? It's the same with the Challenge Cup last year when they were saying to Toronto, Catalan and Toulouse, you've got to pay to enter. And Catalan being the holders were like, we're going to join the other two, we're going to boycott with the other two. And that, it damaged the image of the RFL badly, made them look very, very protectionist, outdated, and questions were being raised about, okay, why are we trying to stunt the growth of the game in non-traditional locations, which is the only way the game can financially survive. Why are we actually not doing that? Am I a Jets fan? Yes, I am. Excuse me. Yes, I am a Jets fan. Have been a Jets fan for, well, quite some time. I also obviously, where's my hoodie? Oh, where is it? Oh, I also like the Yokes as well. So I've got my my hockey tats. Fox hunting. Yes. Is it classed as sport? Is it classed as hunting to remove vermin? Hunting animals for sport, hunting animals for commercial reasons. I'm going to leave that one open-ended because the definition varies from each person you ask and each organisation you ask. But I think hunting for food and animal control, I think that's acceptable. But hunting for sport, not so much. But I digress. I think for me personally, I don't live in the country, so to speak. I've always pretty much lived in an urban environment. And even though where I live currently is on the edge of a rural urban kind of boundary, because you go 5-minute walk, I'm in fields, and I'm in the countryside. It's a weird one, but I have worked on farms. I have been in the rural side of things. Some of my bin rounds are in rural locations. So I come into contact with farmers quite a bit, ironically, with their their private drives and the horse stables and sheep farms and cattle farms and so it's interesting on the debate about fox hunting, but I think I'm going to leave that debate on this channel because that's more of a political decision this country took. But it is what it is. What's the team in the NHL you dislike the most? There are some teams that I'm not so keen on, but I don't really have a dislike. Um, I'm not overly fond of the Bruins. I'm not overly fond of the Penguins. I'm not overly fond of two of the three California teams, the Ducks and the Kings. I prefer the Sharks doing well than the other two. But I don't overly dislike a team. I think the reason for that is I'm not from Canada or the US, so I can look at it from the perspective outside the box. And yes, I've got Vegas gear as well. I bought into the Vegas Golden Knights. I thought that was a positive story for the NHL a couple of years ago. I look at it from the outside in. I understand why the rivalries are there and why there is some hate directed at certain teams. I think certain teams have a reputation for having dirty players, um, bad fans. I think we'll find that with every single 31 fan bases. If the Sharks and Golden Knights, when they play, that's always heated and has been from the first game those teams played against each other. You could say Vancouver and Boston. That's a tasty matchup, and that goes back to 2011 and the disastrous. I will say it was disastrous for both teams, even though Boston won that Stanley Cup final. The behaviour of players and fans alike on both teams wasn't great, and it didn't help. Where it culminated in the Vancouver riot of 2011, which tainted the image of Vancouver for the second time. It was the second time they had been to a Stanley Cup final and rioted. Out of the three Stanley Cup finals they'd been to, that was twice in 15 years they'd done that. 16 years, and it 17 years even. I've got to get my numbers. I can't count. I can't count. It basically happened twice in a generation that Vancouver got to the Stanley Cup final and their fans misbehaved during that period of time. But at the same time, you get why that's a heated rivalry. It's not as bad recently as it was earlier in the decade, or in the last 10 years, but that's an issue. But there are some teams that I don't like as much as others. But I have my soft spots for certain teams. It's a league where I look from the outside in, but I understand why there is the dislike of certain fan bases to each other. And 3 or 4 years ago, before I had this channel, I would have definitely said I dislike the Bruins. I actually actively hate said team. Now, having um, followed so much sport over the last 3 years and watched so much sport and looked at various leagues and sports in that time frame, I'm more observant. There are certain fan bases, both at club level and international level, that I don't like. There are one or two that I seriously dislike, but for the most part, I'm different to teams that I don't follow or don't support. I like watching the rivalries when I'm a neutral as well. That's something really fun when the Flyers and the Penguins play. I like watching that rivalry. When the Blackhawks and the Blues play, I like watching that rivalry. The Battle of Alberta has become relevant again for the first time in like 20 years. So as a neutral looking in, it's kind of fun to watch. But it is what it is. My favourite player on the Jets themselves. Well, I'm a bit pissed off that Bufflin's basically retired and Ben Sherratt's moved on, which is a shame. Two favourite players. But I'm a Mark Scheifele fan. I think he's very underrated. I think he's more underrated than he should be. I think he deserves a lot more respect because he is the heartbeat and driving force of that team. Absolutely. But I'm a bit annoyed that we traded some players and didn't hold on to some players in the last off season. especially Bufflin and Sherrod. That situation with those two, I think, is a problem, because it's left a massive hole on the blue line. But the players who've stepped up have, I think, overachieved this year, or actually played to prove a point, because Pionk and Boyu and all that weren't expected to be as good, and they were coming off not very good form at previous teams, and they've said actually we are good enough to be top six defensemen in this league. Um, but as I say, all the momentum that the team had built up to this point, that nice little run before the season was suspended, is gone. So if the playoffs were to be announced, say, look, oh, we're going to start playing them in a neutral venue, it doesn't matter. You've got to treat it like a pre-season game. The players have to get back up to speed. They've been shut down for 2-3 weeks. They're not going to be match fit, match ready. That's where you're more likely to get injuries. So we'll see what happens. But I'm a massive Mark Scheifele fan. I think I was always criticised for actually, having Ben Sherratt as one of my favourite players by a lot of Jets fans. I found that really weird. I prefer hard-working, gritty players who put a lot more energy in than skilled players who throw tantrums when they don't have things go their way. But that's my opinion on that situation. Do I think he'll be the new captain if Wheeler retired? Yes, absolutely. When Wheeler goes, Scheifele's going to be the new captain. I think it's a natural progression. And he'll be the third captain for the franchise in Winnipeg since they've moved back from Atlanta. Andrew Ladd, I don't think was the right choice as captain the first time round. I think Blake Wheeler's been a very, very good choice actually by Paul Maurice naming him as captain. I think not a lot of people expected Wheeler to step into that role, and he's done very, very well. But I think, Scheifele is waiting for that captaincy. I think he's still got a good 7-8 years ahead of him in the league. I think maybe 9 years with this break. But we don't know what's going to happen with trades, injuries, free agency, draft, because all that's now up in the air completely. We don't know what's going to happen if the playoffs do take place. They go, right, we're not finishing the regular season, we're going straight to playoffs. We're going to expand the playoffs because of teams playing different number of games, and we're just going to rock on that way. Or if they're going to try and complete the season in a condensed schedule and then go to playoffs. I think it's everything's up in the air at the moment, so I will have to see what happens. But Scheifele, I think, is definitely matured as a player, as a leader, and he is the driving force behind the team. Doesn't matter what Laine O'Connor or Roslovic or Ehlers do. He's the driving force behind the team going forward. And there's a lot of other young players like Appleton in there and Kopp and Sami Niku is going to start, and Pullman are going to get more time on the blue line as time goes on. They're going to get more minutes and more games. And Pionk, I think, is a more than adequate replacement for Truba in that trade. I think we actually won that trade. I think he's massively bounced back. I think he needed to change his scene. Nathan Beaulieu has, again, another player who's had a bounce back season from a rough time in the previous team he was at. The Laine situation, I think he's much better this season. Last year was just a mess. He wasn't fully fit. We know that. We know he wasn't up to speed. The 2018 playoffs, we know he was going injured. I wouldn't say he's not doing anything. He's getting more assists. You look at his assists, they're up. He's becoming more of a rounded player. He still has that dangerous shot on him. He still has that quick release, accurate, powerful shot, slap shot or wrist shot, backhander. But I think what he needed to work on was his two-way game and his team play. And that's something that I think was holding him back. He had a very, very good 2018 and then the foot injury. And last year, 2018, 2019, I think he came into the season not fit. His mind was in the wrong place. He was playing for a contract. He was expecting to get paid for what he had done, not what he was going to do. And he was expecting to get paid more than he got. and and then I think it dawned on him that bridge contract was what he was going to get. It's what he's got, and now he's got to play to prove to the coach that he's good enough to get big money. But now what we see with this shutdown, this lockdown, this I'm not going to call it a lockout because players want to play, but this unprecedented series of events, the salary cap is going to be affected because there was discussions about the salary cap before we went into um, the shutdown mode. About 2 weeks before, they were discussing that the cap's going to be higher. The NHL had a board of governors meeting, and all the GMs meeting, and they were expecting the cap to be like $5 million higher. Now that the season's on hold, that puts into question any cap raise, and free agency and the trade and the draft and entry level contracts, RFAs and UFAs and all the escrow and all the various complications. Even I don't really understand escrow. I don't like escrow, but basically, it raises questions about okay, players on expiring contracts, all that. It's going to be a financial nightmare. Now the league does have money; it does have that financial buffer, especially with Seattle joining the Vegas money. They have a bit of a financial buffer that they can sort of play around with. But it's going to be interesting to see that affects the salary cap going forward, and how they're going to deal with free agency, draft, pre-season trades, and when we're going to get back to some kind of normality. But I would expect with the US and their poor handling of the emergency, we might have to say that there is no play for the rest of the season. There's no Stanley Cup to be awarded, which hasn't happened apart from the lockout season of 2005 since 1990, where the Stanley Cup didn't get awarded. So we are in uncharted territory, and we don't know what the future holds. Do I have a plan to move to Canada? I would love to move to Canada, but right now we've got to get through the next 2 to 3 weeks. We've got to get through this current situation first, first and foremost, and we'll go from there. I think there's not a lot we can do while we're in this uncertain period of time. When you're considering moving around the world or relocating anywhere, you need certainty, and that's something we don't have. We have no certainty right now with what's going on. And while I would love to move somewhere like Manitoba, that is sort of my dream. Right now, as I say, we definitely need certainty. We definitely need an idea of what's going to happen, and we just don't know. So it'll be interesting to see what the outcome of this next couple of months is. And it'd be nice to see some sport get played at some point, because that will bring us some sort of normality back to our lives. And I think that's what people are just craving for at this point is normality. This is very weird times, and of course, I think the world's global economy will bounce back quite quickly, which will be refreshing. But it's a wait and see moment. I mean, I've got a couple of work colleagues who've got family in Canada. I've got friends in Canada, so I would love to go, but as I say, when you're planning a move like that, you need certainty and a direction. And while I have the thought is there and the want is there, it's the lack of certainty right now. And this is where, going back to sport, the lack of certainty is what's crippling decision making, because sports and leagues and teams, they've approximated their costs for the season. They've approximated their earnings for the season based on minimum and maximum attendances, TV revenues, cup runs, you know. With no sport taking place, those approximations, those calculations they put in place so they can budget, go out the window. So the longer this goes on, the more uncertain it becomes, and then that's where the losses start mounting. That's where staff get laid off. It's where staff are told you've got to take your annual leave. If I would like to go to Canada, Winnipeg, Manitoba, the middle bit, the cold bit, I would definitely want to go to Winnipeg, Manitoba. Um, that's where I would like to go. Uh, it's it's where I want to go. Ontario, too expensive, and Vancouver's too expensive as well. Um, Edmonton and Alberta, uh, they're more reliant on the oil and gas industry. So as time goes on, economically, that's going to be a very poor choice when those industries wind down. But it is what it is. But I made up my mind where I would like to go. It's just getting there. But right now, we need to focus on the more pressing issues at hand, which is getting through this current situation and coming out the other side and working out what's going to happen, because the sporting landscape is going to change and society is going to change, at least in the short and medium term. Long term, that's something for the future to worry about, but in the short and medium, next few weeks and months is what's more important. And as I say, in sport, there's no certainty, and there's lots of questions being asked, and questions have to be asked of the IOC. Questions have to be asked of Todd Greenberg and the NRL. Questions have to be asked of the RFL board, the RFU, the Premier League, the FA, UEFA, FIFA, all these big governing bodies that have they're putting down dates when they want to go get back to business, but governments are saying, well, we're going to extend our lockdowns. We're not certain if the lockdown has to be extended. So um, certainty is something we are lacking at this time. But if we're going by China, about 3 to 4 months like this is probably likely. You'll be surprised how quickly the time passes. When they mentioned the first, case, it was only at Christmas time, December. That was when the first cases were being reported. We know China a lot, but that's when the first cases were reported. Um, it's now what, end of March? Seems like yesterday. So time does fly quite quickly, and you'll be surprised how quickly it passes. A lot has happened in that 3 or 4 month period. I mean, the Six Nations only had a few games left to play, gets cancelled. And we've seen how quickly it goes from, will Sergei Parise retire, against England, to Twickenham, to will he play his last test at all? Will he get to play another test match and retire? Or is his retirement, you know, as he plays his last test match? But that debate disappears, and it's like, okay, let's have a look at the social implications of what's going on. You would think China would be good at every major sport given their population and resources. You would think that, but they don't have that history of team sports. It's more the martial arts, which are an individual discipline, and football and rugby and cricket and ice hockey and all these Anglo-Saxon, as we call them, European sports, where the European and North American nations and the European colonies, so the Western world, so to speak, which are very, very good at. China is very late at picking up. One thing that China has done a lot of in the last, I'm going to say 20, 30 years, is put a lot of state funding into sports programs. And it is starting to pay dividends, but you can't just create talent overnight. You can put a sports program in place that develops a production line of solid team players when it comes to rugby, when it comes to football. But the actual talent, it takes generations of play and putting the foundations in place for future generations to build off to get to the same level that the European, North American, Australasian, and Latin America, and all that have had 2 centuries of. But they have put a lot of money and a lot of investment and a lot of infrastructure in place, and they just produce generic, overcoached droids. So we'll see what happens. Yes, they are good at table tennis. Yes, they are good at snooker. And they bought into certain sports more than others. And sports like snooker and table tennis are quite easy to get into. They're not expensive to get into. You don't have to rent out, huge sports stadiums or sports pitches to train on. We need a snooker table or a table tennis table and a training partner to play at any level. You just need your own equipment, which is a snooker cue or a pool cue, depending on your cue sport, or table tennis bat and a ball and someone to play against. So in that sense, they're inexpensive sports to participate in, and to all you have to do is pay your entrance fee for the tournament and go from there. They bought into those sports. The issue with China is, and this is something that I have mentioned before and I have researched, is sports corruption and illegal gambling. Now, this is something I have actually been following quite a bit lately because it's related to the Crown Casino resorts in Australia. Ironically, is gambling offences and match fixing, and yeah, there is issues with match fixing, spot fixing, and sports corruption in China. It is illegal to gamble in China. It's not illegal in Hong Kong or Macau, which are special territories. Which Macau is a former Portuguese colony. It's got loads of casinos. It's their version of Monte Carlo or Vegas. Hong Kong, obviously the former British protectorate, which is now a free city that is technically owned by China, but isn't. We've seen those protests in Hong Kong, these democracy protests in Hong Kong. You're allowed to gamble there. Horse racing's legal, that kind of stuff. Whereas you just go across into mainland China, it's illegal. Organised crime has a big part to play, money laundering. There's a big investigation going on into Crown casinos to do with breaking the law in China. That is an issue that's been going on for around 10, 15, 20 years. It's known about. It's common knowledge that the Chinese Super League is pretty corrupt. That's football. It's common knowledge that the South Asia Games, Southeast Asian Games, or the Asian Games, things like that, lots of fixing there. And Asian professional sport is rife with match fixing allegations. I've watched so many documentaries over the last 4 years in relation to organised crime and Oriental organised crime, like triads and other gangs in Southeast Asia and the Asia Pacific region, fixing sports matches, all the way from Pakistan and India when it comes to cricket, through into Hong Kong, Singapore, and Indonesia, and into mainland China and Korea. There's been Korean, the J League and the Korean League, Japan and Korea, those football leagues, corruption allegations, players arrested and questioned. And then it links back into European football, European sport, links back in. That's been an ongoing issue for quite some time. Yes, China does have an NBA player, and I forget his name because I don't follow the NBA that much, but I do know who you talk about. It's just I forget his name. He was at the Olympics once. And they're also, now talking about putting a salary cap into Chinese Super League. Talking about criminology, I did actually study law for a while, and I'm very interested in history, and criminal history is really interesting and big. I have an interest in a whole variety of organised crime. I mean, I've got books in it somewhere. I've got films, DVD. Here's my DVD selection there. I've got books everywhere. I've obviously just moved back, but I've got books all over the place. And crime history is quite interesting, and how criminality in sport is so linked for so long. Horse racing, the Shergar disappearance, that's one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in sport. The theft of the World Cup in 1966, and then Pickles the dog finds it in a hedge on his morning walk, days before the tournament kicks off. And a whole variety of things. I've got What? You've got The Business. There's a film there. Rush Hour, obviously. Young Guns and Young Guns 2, based on true events with Billy the Kid. You could say that's old West crime, I suppose. You got The Three Kings. That's profiteering in war kind of thing. You got a film on the craze. Body by Blood. Once Upon a Time in Mexico. 44-inch chest. Traffic. Suspects. Um, what films have I got? I've got all sorts. Films everywhere. Black Mass. It's a brilliant film. Brilliant film about Whitey Bulger, Boston, Irish gangster, Irish American gangster. Oh, that's a historical film. What's this one? U.S. Marshals, Tommy Lee Jones, sequel to The Fugitive. Wesley Snipes is in that, and Robert Downey Jr. before he went to prison for drug offences. So when he was all screwed up on the meth. 310 to Yuma. That's about a guy going on death row. You've got Magnificent Seven, the remake. Rock and Roller, it's an iconic film. Bond films floating around, obviously. Ronin, brilliant film. Nazi zombies, avoid that. Oh, that's my money pot. This is my money pot. My mate taped it up so my money wouldn't fall out when I moved, but that's my money pot. It's full of about 10 quid in change. That is not a real skull, that is plastic, may I just add. Actually resin, but I've got books down here. Got all video games everywhere. But yeah, I like lots of notifications coming up all at the same time, which I hate on this. I hate Google. It does this a lot. But no, honestly, I've got a variety of. I mean, most of my films are either war films or action films of some kind. And I've got some really good ones as well. But what else have I got? Why do you open out the way? Because Big Zafrica is Layer Cake, not a great film, but got that. Goon, I got more. I've got several series of Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Spy's quite funny. Bad Boys, got a bit of Bad Boys. There's. Now I've got my Amazon orders coming through saying, "Oh, your order has been dispatched." I know it's been dispatched. I ordered it yesterday. God, I bought some things off Amazon. I know at some point I'm probably going to go into lockdown myself because of my frontline work. There's going to be some point where I show symptoms. So I've decided to buy a load of books and some DVDs to keep my mind ticked over because I've run out of books to read, ironically. And I've read a lot of books already, and I need some new stuff. But no, I mean, going back to crime and sport, we know that organised crime has had an interest in sport for a long time. Boxing, prime example of where they launder their money, and it's. Oh, see you later, Mr. Keegan. I'm not going to stay online much longer because it's 4 o'clock UK time, and I think it's time for me to stretch my legs a little bit because, not going to lie, being in temporary lockdown because I'm a key worker, it does get frustrating when you're not doing stuff. I would normally be having a ride, going to see mates, going for a wander. So I want to go in the garden for a little bit and enjoy the limited sunshine that we have because it's not been very warm today. But I know there's a lot of things we've discussed. It's not as warm as yesterday. It's a cold front coming in, but we haven't had rain for a week. That's something that we've had a lot of, and that's affected sport as well. We've had so many matches affected when it comes to football and rugby league, where it's been so heavy with rain that water on pitches, it affects how the game is played. You've got to play the conditions as well as your teammate, as well as your opponents and the referee. And horse racing's been affected because of the rain. We've had like 6, 7 months of continuous rain and a bit of snow in there, and it's just we haven't had a break, and this is the longest we've not had rain for 7 months. And it has to happen when we go into this global lockdown. It shows how much human activity does actually affect the weather. It does. But there we go. I'm going to leave that there. Italy's economy in the south always, but Italy, I don't know what's going to happen with Italy. It's bad. I've got family out there right now. It's not great. But I think when normality resumes, people are just going to want to work and want to get out of the house, and they're going to want to do stuff. So I think we might actually have a bounce back, a real, very, very not quick, but you'll see economic activity go just through the roof. You really will. You will see obviously economies contract, and then they're going to rebound quite quickly, I think. But that's a video for the other channel. How will this affect the global economy? I think there's going to be a rather sizable rebound. I think people are still getting paid the 80% here who are signed off, and I can see people just wanting to get out, and those who have been quite smart and have saved money, or those who have worked in frontline services, they're going to take a lot of holiday, and that's where agencies come in, and they're going to pick up people who've been out of work for a little bit, especially on things like the bins, on council contracts from public gardens, road working, labouring jobs. Just get a CSCS card. People will just want to do stuff and get out and about, and you're going to see the bounce back effect. It may be different around the world, but you're going to see some kind of rebound where people just want to get back to work. And with how the government has asked companies like Dyson and Hoover, which are British vacuum cleaner companies, to make ventilators because they work with suction, we may see a lot of domestic-based contracts for engineering in countries around the world to reduce supply chain costs where you're reliant on overseas parts. So you may see a lot more manufacturing, ironically, come back to various countries rather than being outsourced to China. I think we may have to spend a little more on our products by a couple of pounds here or there. But I think a lot more products are going to be made to a higher standard and more locally produced, because the global supply chain has been trashed, and I think the trust between countries has been damaged somewhat, especially towards China. And the fact that the British government's asking Dyson and I think Hoover as well. Hoover's actually a company. It's not just a name for a vacuum cleaner. It is actually a company. I think the fact that these home appliance companies that make washing machines, tumble dryers, vacuum cleaners, dishwashers, if they're being now asked to go into the medical profession and make medical supplies, and they have factories in this country, I think you're going to see big contracts for the National Health Service and private health providers in this country going forward, and you are going to see, I think, more of their products being made here rather than parts coming from overseas or factories overseas. And I think China's going to feel the heat for its slow response to the outbreak and the way they handled the outbreak. And on the sports side of things, I think what you're going to see is player wages in football drop, and we may have seen the end of the record-breaking transfer fees. I think fans will not tolerate players being overpaid anymore. I think we may now see a market correction, which should have happened for different reasons, but we are going to see a market correction when it comes to player salaries and sports finances. But I'm going to leave that there because we went off topic a lot. There was a lot to discuss, and it was just fun to talk to people online, because even though I've been working, I'm still working. Having these days off, well, I get my days off where I can't leave the house, and if I have to leave the house, it's just to do basic, go to the bank, do supply runs. I think I would go mad if I didn't do this. But I've got some video ideas lined up. We've got some sports history video ideas lined up. Some hypothetical video ideas where, like, what could happen, what's the time frame we're looking at, lined up. But we'll get to them when we have a rough idea of what's going on with situation. Now, thank you very much for watching. Please place your thoughts below if you just watch the stream as a replay, and I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon.